Welcome to the 14th edition of Sound Reflection series. The series is mediating of sound in fine arts, and it was started in 2017 by Daniel Hanslik and Pavel Markus, audiovisual artists and professors running a time-based media department at Faculty of Art and Design at Jan Evangelista Purkyně University in Ústí nad Labem. My name is Polina Khatsenka, and I'm currently at master's program at Time-Based Media Studio, and starting from 11th edition of Sound Reflection, I help with production and curating. Today's episode is going to present the work of Simonem Whethamem, a multidisciplinary artist, researcher, and sound explorer from United Kingdom, Bristol, currently based in France. Simon works within his own authentic environment, focused on sonic activity, including music production, performance, development, and realization of sound installations and devices since 2005. So, Simon, I think the best idea for me is to start from the general question, which is focused on your own attitude as a practitioner and artist to sound as a medium and as a mean of expression, and maybe if you would like to, it would be nice if you address sound as a physical aspect.
Okay, well, so I guess I've been working with sound as creative. In this way, like working from field recordings onwards from 2005, I was making much more musical work before that, but actually using concrete sounds or environmental sounds as a means of expression began in 2005. So it began with field recording. Basically, it was a means to explore a place with a group of other artists, more visual artists. But as I was working with them and with this process, I discovered a whole world of artists out there already working with field recordings in various different ways. And so I guess when I started, I was being led by example. So there were people composing with them, there were people presenting documents of situations or environments. And I guess I combined the two in the beginning, going more towards composition, then finding people that were performing with the work. That was like 2 years later. I actually found I could perform with this material when I learned Ableton Live. I had a couple of lessons in just one-on-one with this guy that was offering lessons in Bristol, and found that I could actually play these sounds almost DJing with my own recordings, and actually then because I was composing more with multi-track or digital audio workstations and stuff, but very graphically, like block, and then to actually have these clips that you could just instantly access and layer, and then you could suddenly stop them, and it opened up a whole world for me. And then over the years I've become more interested in what sound can actually do, the energy of sound. It can trigger other things, it can trigger movements, it can trigger motors, it can trigger light, and then the acoustic element as well, how you can change the feeling in a space and the atmosphere of a space with a certain sound. You can really completely alter the perception of a space with sound. So all of these things became very interesting to me, not as a kind of research level, but just more trying things out, experimenting with things, more intuitive, what things appealed to me and what didn't.
I just thought that it would be interesting to know in which in which role you put the sound, as you mentioned, these possibilities to use the sound to trigger any other physical parts of installation or anything. In which way do you see, like, why do you address sound? Why do you use sound with this? Because
well, I guess coming from composing music, that's how I began working with these environmental sounds, these more abstract sounds, but sounds of a place or sounds that would trigger memories. So I guess in the beginning I was working with this idea of almost not telling a story, but having some kind of narrative to it, even just for me, like charting a journey or something like this. And then if I played it to an audience, and it's sometimes sounds that were around them every day in their own city or their own town, then they would actually have these other associations with them, or they wouldn't really realize that they were sounds from there until I spoke to them afterwards. And then they were like, well, this took me somewhere else. It took me to outer space, or it took me somewhere completely different. But then coming to, I don't know, I think I reached a certain point, and I'm sure many people have, where it's just, okay, I've done that for long enough. I need to challenge myself, and why am I working with sound? What am I doing with sound? So then trying these different things, like if you amplify sound and play it back through a speaker, you're turning it into an electronic signal. So can you then power a motor or cause a light to light up, a lamp to light up, and things like this? So actually working with the energy of the sound and the impulse. So there's a trace of the sound still there that's actually creating something completely different. And if you didn't know, then maybe it's just something else. It's a machine not working properly, or it's a lamp not working properly. And that was what drew me to these environmental sounds in the beginning, and away from what I was knowing was music at the time, with this very regular beat and stuff, very regular rhythms and loops. These environmental sounds were very unpredictable and random in some way. You couldn't predict when the wind was going to blow a certain leaf or something when you were trying to record it. Or, as you probably know yourself, if you go and try and record a sound that's been happening for the last 5 minutes, as soon as you turn the recorder on, it stops. So it's part of the frustration of it, but part of the draw of it. You just don't know sometimes what you're going to capture. But I wanted to then use that unpredictability in triggering something else.
I would like to ask you about the next thing, which is addressing aural perception. I'm not putting it into a controversial or the contrast way of perceiving the world with visuality and anything else, but I'm interested in your perception of sound as an tool for orientation, as a tool for communication, as a tool for listening to each other, to environment, and yeah, I want to know how do you address oral perception, and maybe as we talked about it before, maybe you could address also how you perceive the tactility and physicality and touch of sound. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think definitely becoming involved in field recording and recording these environments where you have to become much more patient to first of all to collect those sounds, especially if they stop as soon as you start the recorder, but also to find them. So you have to become more sensitive to the sound world, I guess, the world, the sonic world around you. Yeah, I'm using awful terms here, I know, but you get what I mean. So yeah, learning more patience and more sensitivity. You become more sensitive, definitely. I think it's something that I didn't even realize so much until I started giving workshops, and then I saw other people very quickly get it. They would slow down, and then the sound would also, if they stopped and listened and even closed their eyes, it took them somewhere else. It transported them. It's only a small shift, really. And I become aware of it when I say to someone else, "Oh, do you hear that sound? What's that coming from?" Almost as if I want to go and record it or something. But just I'm intrigued as to what that sound is that doesn't quite fit, or it's in the background, but it's cutting through everything else. And someone else will say, "What sound?" Or there's something rolling around in the shelf of a bus. Like, "Oh, I wish I brought my recorder." "What, you heard that? How did you hear that?" That it's like rattling around above our heads for the last 10 minutes, And so other people they've already kind of blocked it out, or tuned out of those other sounds because they're already deep in thought, or they're thinking about, they're listening to a conversation. There's definitely a different way of experience. It becomes a different way of experiencing the world that I do take for granted now. So, and then going on to the tactility side of it, that's come through performing, and as I said to you before, I think it's also coming back to my training as a designer and a model maker. I made models for many years where I actually built things, and you got to know materials in that way, how to work with them and how to use them in combination with other things. And then when I started to work with performing, attaching transducers to objects and moving them around, or even putting them on someone's lap or something so that they would feel the vibrations, I just became much more interested in, or drawn to how sound feels, and then what you can do with that, how you can explore that, how you can have objects moving around a table or on the floor or falling against each other just with the power of sound, not with you actually doing anything. You put it in place, but then you can make everything kind of move around. And you can do the same with lower frequencies from a subwoofer. You can cause things to shake around a room or the actual building to shake.
Is it somehow a way to address for you abstract phenomenon that we don't have a vocabulary sometimes to talk about, but we can.
Right. I mean, it is. It's something that's intangible. Generally, you can't touch sound. You can't capture it. I mean, even in recording, it's a digital representation of a sound. It's not the sound. So, yeah, to actually then have it affect the material world, and then maybe even try and capture that, which is something that I can probably talk about later with some of my more recent projects. But it's only being caused by that physicality of sound.
When you do say about the recording that it's not the sound, in which way do you perceive this situation? It's like, is it something which is more like as a sonic not sonic event, or is it like a documentation of, I don't know how to say it right, I mean...
Well, a recording for me is, it can be a documentation of something, but it's not the same. It's not the same situation when you play it back. Even if you recorded it in a certain way that it's realistic, binaurally or with multi-channels, it's still not the same event again when you play it back. Like anything, like even like a performance that you rehearsed to death and then you do it again for someone, it's a different performance. So for people to want to try and get this hyper realism is, I'd much rather someone experience the moment in a performance or an installation or whatever, even a talk or a workshop or something, and then use those recordings or those documents in a relatively imaginative way to create another moment or a series of moments if you're going to compose with them, lead you on a journey. But it's not, I could talk a lot about this, but just remembering one example where two artists tried to capture a parade with 4 microphones and try and replay it in a space through 4 speakers, hoping that the 2 artists don't listen to this, because they'll know who I'm talking about. But I just didn't see why, to start with, why you would want to recreate that just in sound, and then how effective is it? Because a parade, like where people are actually walking through a narrow street or something and making a lot of noise, you're not going to recreate that with 4 speakers in a gallery space. It's going to be very dry and missing so much of that experience. So why not then use some recordings from that, but use them in a different way to somehow recreate the feeling of it, rather than the actual documentation of a bunch of people moving through a street. That would be a challenge.
Yeah, I see.
I wouldn't want to do it.
Actually, what I was trying to ask you was more referring to, I know that it's no strict and direct answer to this, but if it's necessary to interpret the sound, to give it an interpretation, that's what interested me when you were talking about this recording, and you don't really catch the sound because the sound was somewhere, and you recorded it somehow with a microphone, with some type of microphone, so it's not the whole sonic event. And which interests me here is if it's necessary then to, when it's played, when it's reproduced, if it's necessary to give it interpretation. And if it's like it's something that I personally address also in my work, and mostly in performance, and maybe we will move to it soon. And just interpretation of recorded or produced sounds is something that very interests me personally, and that's why I would love to know your attitude to this.
For me, I don't want to interpret the sound like this is the sound that you hear. I do want it to stir some kind of imagination in the listener, even if it's a really abstract sound, and then it's almost like off-putting, but then at least they have a reaction to it. But I think with some projects that I've done in the past, it has been about a place. So then you hear a certain animal or a certain phenomenon. But for me, also, I realized that if I actually set out to record a certain event, I'm talking like a glacier cracking or something like that, it's, for me, even if I got the best recording of that, then I played it to you through some really great speakers. Again, it's still not being there and witnessing it. So I've been more drawn to record things that could be more open to interpretation. So I've been working with some things today, like hydrophone recordings and very close mic'd recordings, and I'm sure that if you heard them, they would trigger thoughts or images or a place that's nothing like where I actually recorded them, just because of the way they've been recorded and then combined. So no, it's more open to interpretation for me. The fact of I even mentioned about putting some of the vibrating objects on the audience so they could actually feel the vibrations, and they're not huge objects or anything, like small cardboard boxes, even some mannequins and things like that. Anything I find, I stick one of these things to. But I have this the work Made to Malfunction, which is a very different way of working with the devices that are programmed to work to function pretty unpredictably. So I was showing it in Huddersfield, the University of Huddersfield, earlier this year, and there's one particular one that everyone sort of is drawn to. It's usually the people's favourite because they can see it. And then I was also asking people not to touch them, but I saw a young girl putting her hands on them. She was with her mum, and she's not so young, but she's young, like teenager. And so I went across and I actually said, do you mind not touching the boxes, because they're metal and they mark really easily. And they very quickly explained that she couldn't actually see very well. She was sight impaired, and so the way she was experiencing the work was actually touching the boxes. And so I just asked her, so which is your favourite so far? Because she was really enjoying the vibrations through them. And she went directly for the one that everyone liked to look at. It's really strange that that's also the favourite of someone who can't see it. Just from the vibrations of it, this was the one that she was drawn back to each time. I just felt like this is a really interesting thing that I've been working against the visual, and now I'm trying to incorporate it so that you focus more on the sound, but you're drawn in through the visual, because I do feel it can hold the attention more, so you do appreciate the sound more. Otherwise, people that aren't sensitive will just walk in and walk out again. I've seen it. I know it happens. So to then have that conversation with someone who couldn't see them, but she enjoyed them in a very different way, and that one was still the favorite. It was just really interesting to me.
You mentioned that you are doing workshops. Maybe you have some experience with blind people in this, or?
I don't have so much. I was supposed to give a workshop earlier this year to some sight impaired people. I don't even know if I'm using the correct term now, but because there are levels of blindness as well. But no, it's something that I've given workshops to a large cross section of people, young people, old people, some with some difficulties, both mental and physical. So it's funny that I've never actually been asked, but then it's usually that it's the sighted people that need this attention kind of shift. So someone that's already having problems seeing, they're already much more sensitive with sound and everything else. So maybe it's not necessary, but it would be really interesting for people to have a, I guess not really a workshop, but more of a kind of a sharing experience.
Yeah, I think that
I'm
would be.
Sure the different perspective would be. It could even inform my practice more.
Yeah, I think it could be a link to the next question, which is about physicality, but in some other perspective, and it's about performing. It's like in general about your experience of performance, and I would love to have your opinion also on this collective experience that you mentioned already before a bit. And in general, how the performance impacts or influences your perception of time, and how do you address in the performance the site-specific approach? How is it related to the space where you perform? Because I thought that it seems to me from the works that you have online that your performances are mostly very site-specific, special. That it's not a performance as we are like used to have to think about performance as a stage and a person in front of the audience,
Right.
But your setting is different. So give us a word.
It has been, yeah. Since working with difficult spaces and awful sound systems mostly through traveling in 2012. I traveled to some places where you would arrive and it was difficult for many reasons, and so I became much more self-contained, and so I could actually travel with my own little sound system using the transducers that I've spoken about, but also small speakers or different kinds of different sizes of speakers that would almost work as filters, and then actually move them around the space as well. So each space it's of course going to change each performance. I used to work before that with actually just trying to spend some time in a place and get specific sounds, but realized very quickly that first of all I was putting myself under a lot of pressure, and then I would fall into certain patterns and tricks. I would record certain sounds, so I think they weren't actually so different after all, the performances. Also, we've talked about the setup, the concert setup, the table, the chair, the speakers, the audience in lines. This became something that I really wanted to break away from, and I tried a few different ways of doing, like trying to play behind the audience, but then they would start to turn around and watch still, or they would stand behind me and watch what I was doing on the computer. So when I started to actually use the objects and move them around, I would, through working with a couple of other people, Eamon Sprott in Australia being one particular one, we would put chairs in more of a random way, no lines or anything, but still with space so I could move things in between. And then I would ask the audience to close their eyes. and I wouldn't insist, because I think that puts the audience in a different place. If you ask them to, or suggest that it's a really good idea to, it's their choice, then they do it, and then they feel better that they weren't told to do something, they weren't ordered. I don't like being told what to do, so I can imagine there are many of us out there. But it generally worked, and people that did look, they said, "Oh, I wish I hadn't looked, I wish I hadn't peeked, it broke the magic." And then other people, "I'm so glad I kept my eyes closed, it really, I could feel everything moving around, and I could really hear the space." So that's exactly what I was trying to do. So I was happy with that setup. But that's been, since 2012 I've been kind of working with that. So it became problematic in some situations, and I have actually started to try something similar from the desktop, from the stage sometimes, but to still try and spatialize sound in some way, and for the audience to experience the sound still without necessarily just staring at me, staring at my laptop, or doing some kind of action, but more hearing the sound in the space.
Did you work with some visual artists, like in some collaborations on?
I have. I tried my own visuals twice. Once with just a photograph, which actually worked quite well, until the connection to the projector bust, and then I had the blue screen behind me. It was quite striking, but and then there was one performance in Bristol where I had like very kind of macro photography textures, just really slowly fading one to another, to another, to another. So now that nothing ever quite resolved. And the people that came up afterwards and said, "Oh, your sound went really well with those visuals," or just talking about the visuals, everything said, "Don't ever do it again." And the only other time I've done it is working with a visual artist, with Hugo Olim. He's from Madeira, Portugal, and we've worked together a couple of times. And so he was using a microscope to really magnifying these tiny little fibers and materials that we found while we were traveling around the island for a week. And I was recording with contact mics and hydrophones and amplifying these tiny sounds into this huge auditorium. So we had this kind of, it was a complementary process that worked really well, and he didn't try and illustrate the sound, and I wasn't pulling the sound to his visuals, but it just worked well together, that kind of symbiosis thing. And since then, not really. I've worked more with people that are thinking differently about sound, like a couple of people who do move around a little as well, or just working in different ways, or performers. So they will actually react to the sound, or again, it'll be the symbiosis, so it's not strictly dancing to the sound of a rainforest or something, but the sounds and the movement are somehow complementary.
Could you say a bit more about this collaboration with dancers?
Yeah, I mean, not just dancers, but let's say performers as well, but people that use movement and or playing some kind of instruments in their practice.
Yeah, for me it's like the most active way to use the body in connection with sound, and I'm interested in the way how you approach this. If you collaborate with the choreographer in advance, like if you develop a project a lot, or if you improvise more, what is the way to find some balance in it?
Because I've gone from the two extremes, I found that for me the most rewarding are the ones where we do try out some things together and see what works and what doesn't. So we have some movements or some scenes, and then from there it's more fluid. So we know where we're going to start. I'll play a certain sound, or the performer will make a certain movement, and we kind of respond to each other, but then it's even not necessarily watching every move or something, but just feeding off each other in that way. I find that much better to work with than this very structured. I mean, if I'm going to work with a very structured choreography, then I don't need to perform. I just need to record something or compose something and then just play it back. There's no, for me, there's a lack of energy and a lack of exchange with that. So I much prefer a rough structure where we then have room for improvisation, but not a complete, from like just meeting on the day and then working together. I'm not quite so happy with that either, because I don't think I'm the best improviser.
Okay.
And I'm happy to admit that.
I know that you said it already, but maybe just with some slight more information about no, it's about this physical a moment of being there, being inside the performance. You mentioned this transfer from the stage setup when you perform to this actually connection to the space. But maybe if you would address it a bit more, it would be fine. Like in connection to the work that you mentioned with the choreographers and with the performers, what is it like for you to be there from this other side?
For both of them?
When you perform.
When I perform, well, like I say, it's that I'm. Again, I'll have almost like a rehearsal or an exploration time, but then when it actually comes to the performance, generally, then it will be me, because the sound of the space is completely changed with an audience in there, and I don't know where they're actually going to sit or where they're going to set up, so I have to then work with however they group themselves. I try not to do too much crowd control, but sometimes it's necessary. So it's then some kind of, it's actually feeling out the space again and working out what's working and what's not. So, and sometimes that's the part that that's the improvised part that then that's something that you really have to work with or against to bring back what you want to achieve. So maybe people grouped in a corner, so I can't actually put a sound in that corner, so I have to think of another way of doing it. Maybe I do actually walk right through them and put the sound in between their legs or something, but I have to I have to be there to do that. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense to just send something and ask people to position speakers, and I've never done that, but I've done installation work that I sent instructions, and when I saw the work that was presented, it was completely wrong, even though the instructions were really clear. And so, I guess I'm a control freak, but I really feel that even with work that should be really easy to go and set up, I need to go and set it up. I want to know that it's how I intend it. So it comes down to performance. Putting out recorded work, CDs and stuff, that's difficult because you never know how people are going to be listening to it. If they're listening to it through their phone speakers or something and missing half the detail, more than half. So for my work, I want to be there, present as much as possible. It's really important. And then even to have an exchange with people before and after, and during, of course. But I like to know how people felt about it afterwards. Even if they didn't like it, I want to know. I want to know why they didn't like it. Because it should be a dialogue. And I don't expect everyone to like it.
Does this happen a lot to you, this dialogue afterwards?
I think it has. It's in some places. Some places it's weirdly it doesn't happen. What I mean is it's weird when it doesn't happen because it usually happens. Because even just We did mention this before. I like to present the work. I like to talk before, introduce myself, kind of say what I'm going to do, or just set the scene a little bit. And as I say, suggest people close their eyes if it's that kind of performance. And I think that gives the audience the idea that I'm like them. I'm nothing special. I'm not standing up on stage or putting myself higher than them. I'm the same. So then hopefully they feel that they can approach me afterwards. And I'm during a performance, I guess I could be seen as being super serious and intense, but before and after, I'm not that person. So hopefully I am approachable. But I also know that people do find it difficult to come up and say, "Oh, I really didn't like that." But the times that it's happened, I've been really glad to have that conversation with people. As long as they have a good reason, not that, "Oh, it was just crap," That's not helping anyone. But if someone comes up and says, "Oh, I didn't like that part where you played really loud," I'm like, well, if I didn't play that part really loud, then it was all really quiet, and there's no reaction. So at least I got a reaction from you.
Okay. I like that you mentioned also some spaces or places where you played and where there was no communication between you and the audience. And that reminded me that I wanted to ask you if you can somehow specify the spaces where you play, where you perform. What kind of places are those?
So I'm thinking, because I hadn't really thought about if there was a pattern, but it's usually that it's a space that's either too large or it is actually set up for this regular accepted performance with chairs in line, seats in lines, and a stage. And so if you don't play from a stage, then people are kind of a little confused, I think. And then there are some places that are like some cinema rooms or some auditoriums for the presentation of either acoustic or electronic music that are acoustically treated, so there's no reverb. And I like to use reverb. I like to make sure that something bounces off the space. So then these sounds become very lost sometimes in a big space that's acoustically treated. So I fight against that. But that was the reason why I started to go back to the tabletop and try and do something similar but with a PA system.
Did you have some experience with playing or presenting your work in some places that are not made for presentation of
they were always usually the more interesting spaces, like an old jail in Australia, and I'm thinking of another where we actually played in the backyard of a gallery space, not in the gallery space but outside. Where else? I mean, gallery spaces are usually better for what I do than auditoriums or regular music spaces, because there's usually reverb. It's like white walls and a concrete floor, and then some partitions and stuff, so you can play the sound around the corner and things like that. And you can play with the audience's perception and positioning as well.
But when it's not a gallery space, or when it's not a concert hall, or something that is made for presentation of art, for example, let's say it like this, as you mentioned, for example, jail, it's a very strong place to perform. I mean, like, the context of it is already so huge and so powerful. How do you feel like there, and how do you address it in your performance?
So this is another project that I did with Eamon in Australia, and we were performing with a group of children and their teachers and one parent, and we were obviously using some of the things like the door latches that are squeaking and things, but as soon as you made one sound, it bounced around. It was a central space. I don't know if you could, it was a central space, and then it had 3 corridors going, that kind of panopticon type idea where you could be in one central place and see all of the cells or all of the prisoners. so acoustically it was amazing to play with, and both myself and I'm sure Eamon, I'm sure that he came at it this way as well. It's a place, it's a location to explore sonically, not really historically. Yes, you have to be aware of it and sensitive to it, and a few people asked about that, but they knew the history of it, whereas I'm coming from another country, so I didn't know. Eamon's from a town an hour and a half away from it, so we don't know the history of the jail. We just know it's an interesting building. So, and a really interesting piece of architecture to explore. So, I mean, you know, you have to be sensitive to a certain degree with something like that, but it's not the focus of the work. It's much more about people hearing the space and hearing what's possible in there.
So you somehow recontextualize the building and you divide it from its history somehow, not maybe intentionally, like it's not the goal, but you give it some other
give it another context. It's like field recording itself. You take a sound and then, for me, you give it another context by not explaining often what it is. And the same with using found objects and motors and all of this. It's to reappraise these things and see them and hear them and experience them in a different way. I guess it comes right back to Dadaism or something like that, or ready-mades.
I would like to ask you about the way you see and perceive the interrelation of art and science, and maybe also how do you address research in your work? Because lots of your work seems also a lot that you really start with some physical phenomenon and develop it with the help of also not only sound but also with the sound, and how do you relate to it?
I was thinking about this because like for me, of course, even starting out and using computers and sound cards and recording equipment as well, you get very technical into that, but just thinking about when I was building an installation in one project with a bunch of speakers, and I was using a solar panel and a contact mic so you could hear the sound, but it was powered by the sun, and all of the other artists were working in the environment with probably natural materials and stuff, and they were like, oh, it's very technical, it's very scientific. But for me it wasn't, because it was like, well, I use all this stuff anyway, and then the only thing that's different is using the solar panel, which I really hope works, which didn't on the opening day, unfortunately. But that's the nature of it. That's what I was wanting to work with, this kind of, again, the unpredictable, even if it comes and fails on me. So I guess I do kind of feel like some of my work is research. It's through experimentations, like to see. I know that when you play a low frequency through a speaker, it moves quite strongly. A big speaker cone, and so then what happens when you put something in it and it sprays out, or what happens when you play a sound through a motor, and not just a motor, but a motor that's actually attached to spinning discs, and then how do you work that into finding like interesting sounds? How do you tease these sounds out of it? And I was thinking about this, that I think reading some scientific papers recently, science usually starts with a theory and then you try and prove it. So then you do the experiments and the investigation after you have the theory. Whereas I'm kind of working the other way around. I just find something and then try and work with it. And then as I'm working with it, I'm like, why am I doing this? Not like I'm completely lost, but what is interesting about this? And is it going to be interesting to someone else? Sometimes that doesn't matter, because as long as it's interesting to me, I'm going to go with it. But it's more just throwing myself into it and research in that way, more kind of empirical research rather than trying to prove a theory or trying to back up an idea. But yeah, I guess it is a similar way of working.
But did you have some offers or some kind of collaborations with some institutions which are more focused on scientific approach and somehow approach to work together?
Not yet, but I have some ideas, 'cause in looking at doing some research into making the invisible visible. I'm even considering a PhD research in this. Then it was suggested that I maybe look at quantum physics and that kind of like the ways that they are. It's almost like quite theoretical as well, because nothing can really be empirically proved, but yet a lot of what we now believe or want to believe, even that what exists, relies on this. So it's this idea of these tiny movements and energies that affect everything, that are represented somehow. Could I possibly then bring that into this kind of research? So there are obviously vibrations on that level that we'll never ever be able to actually feel, but maybe I can somehow represent them through sound, or through a sound drawing, or through some other kind of movement, or I mean, who knows? But it's something that I would really, really like to begin looking into and experimenting with.
Yeah, that's actually what I was asking even in the beginning. What was my kind of question that I wanted to know from you? How do you relate to this? If you put this dimension also into your works, so.
I think it's there, but I think it's only in hindsight that you just, because of working like with the invisible a lot of the time, and then, as I say, in more recent years, then showing the results, making them visible. So yeah, it seems like a natural kind of course to take, to go towards that, the even more microscopic level, the atomic level, or the particular level.
Okay, I want to relate to your experiences with residencies and with sound scene network, I would say. Not in the meaning of giving us all the secrets of how to get a residency, but more in the context of because it's not usual, as it seems to me now, it's not usual to have a residency or gallery focused on sound specifically, and that's what I wanted to ask about.
Okay, well, that's an interesting question, because or an interesting point, because the actual residencies I've taken part in that are focused on sound are actually very few. I've done residencies with, like I said, with nature artists, with other visual artists, with performers. The last, I did 2 this year. One that I was supposed to be in with Subnet in Austria, and Schmiede. I don't know how you say it.
Schmiede, I guess.
Schmiede. I think it is Schmiede. Yeah. So, but I had to do it remotely. But it was based on media art more than sound anyway, I would say. Although Stefan was there. He works with sound, but he also works with video and visuals a lot. The other artists, I think, it was more media art and machine based, from what I remember. The Atelier Expérimental here in France, run by Isabelle Saudage. This was great to. I mean, she wasn't there very much, but it was great to go and create some work there, and be surrounded by these other artworks there. It was very remote, so I was mostly in the studio or out running and walking in the forest. So I didn't get a lot of feedback on that. The most valuable residency experiences, I think, are ones where I have been able to be with a group of artists, and we're all sharing ideas and experiences and even sometimes collaborating. So it's like this exchange. So there's like maybe a musician and me, and then some performers, and then some other people doing more traditional art like painting and sculpture, and somehow we come together and work together and maybe influence each other, or inspire something from the other one. So I mean, my speaker drawings and paintings come from that, from working alongside performance artists that are using ink to spray out of their mouths over things to kind of to leave a mark, this very physical mark, that's either both with and against the tradition of that kind of Asian tradition of ink painting and calligraphy. And then nature art, where people are actually digging in the soil or tying branches together to create a structure, and then thinking, well, how could I do something like this with sound, with the focus on sound, whether it be a piece of nature that makes a sound, or can I then use the sound in the site to create some kind of trace. So and then I have some others that are supposed to be coming up, but they've been postponed because of this situation. But I think one of the most valuable ones was it wasn't residency based on sound, but it was in Estonia, and I was in Tallinn, but I got to visit MOX in Mosta and hang out with John Grishnik, and that was like a pivotal point in my career or whatever, to go and hang out with a few artists that were there, and then we went and visited Riga, and then he came to join me in Tallinn afterwards, and we've had a friendship and a working relationship ever since. So I've been there a few times since, and he's come to the UK. So yeah, but that doesn't exist anymore.
What doesn't exist anymore?
The MOX residency doesn't exist anymore, sadly.
Yes,
it's very sad.
Maybe what's more interesting to me in this situation is the role of galleries in it, in this networking. And I was thinking also, this is also a question that cannot be answered strictly somehow, but does it have to be exhibited in gallery, and what changes when it comes to this shift of putting the artwork, whatever it is, like in the meaning of a form, to some other space, which is not meant in its first meaning to be a space for perceiving or consuming art?
Well, there's a lot of different gallery spaces out there already. Some don't get sound at all, and they try to present it because it's somehow trendy and very present at the moment. There's a lot of visual artists using sound in their work. I put out a call on Facebook earlier because I could only think of a few, like 4, 5 dedicated sound spaces. Otherwise, I've seen festivals that show work, but they show it in a gallery, a white cube gallery space, or a cellar. I mean, some of them, and then some of them work, and then some of them don't. It's super difficult to show multiple sound works in the same space, and the ones that really the ones that I've seen that are successful are few and far between. When it's multiple, when it's just one show and you can walk into a space and experience that sound as it's intended, it's one of the best experiences, I think. But like I say, they're very few and far between. I don't even know where to start with. Would you like examples of good and then examples of bad? I don't even think I need to, because it's unfair to a lot of people.
Maybe a general comment would be better in this situation.
I just think generally people get it wrong. They don't consider, like, going back even to that work that I said about that I wasn't present for and was installed with very clear instructions. The intention of the sound was lost, and they made these units that they looked like I designed, but so they were supposed to shake with soil on top and create patterns like cymatics, but very, very random when you use soil because it's not uniform. And the gallery used these white rocks, which just sounded, from what the short video I saw, just sounded like rocks shaking on a wooden board. I mean, it was just awful. It wasn't, if I'd intended that, great, but I did not intend that at all. It was like low frequency, shaking tiny particles, so you would hardly even hear it, you would just see the effect. But of course, what they did, they made the effect very loud, and it probably annoyed all the other artists as well.
Yeah, this is one of the aspects of exhibiting works which are based on sound somehow, into some spaces where there are some other artworks, and not influencing them or not changing the context for their perception, and etc. Maybe that's why it's interesting personally for me if there are some spaces which are focused on this, which are made in the beginning or somehow adjusted to the exhibition of sound pieces.
Yeah. Well, even putting this call out on Facebook, the spaces that were then mentioned, and some of them I hadn't even thought of or that I knew about, but then I was thinking, no, that's an old shopping centre store, like an old unit in a shopping centre. So it's not really specific. It's the intention is for sound, but it's not designed for sound. I don't know how many actually are. And then you have the other ones that are just a room full of speakers that I actually checked this one, and it doesn't call itself a sound art gallery anymore. It's a space for sound immersion or something. So we'll let that one go. But even then, it's not. You couldn't take your own sound installation in there because it's already set up for an electroacoustic experience. It's not a sound installation. It is a sound installation, but you work through it.
Yeah, maybe there is no answer to this. Maybe it's just the way that people who work with sound should just take into account? And
I think so. I think people need to be more strong about it, and also install work themselves, or go and see how their work is interfering, and I mean in a good way or a bad way, or in dialogue with another piece, because it's going to happen even if you're in two separate rooms. The sounds are going to kind of cross over, or one's maybe really quiet and the other one's really loud. But yeah, I'm thinking about lots of really bad examples, but I saw a Janet Cardiff piece, or like a show, almost like a retrospective in Edinburgh many years ago. And what they did was they actually, I haven't been to the space since, so I don't know if they actually built these corridors into the spaces, but they used like the foam, the sound absorbing foam, along the walls of each of the corridors. So as you got into each space, you didn't actually hear the other sounds very much, the other spaces very much. And I kind of stole the idea from one of my own projects, and then sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, because I really sometimes couldn't control the sound that much. I didn't build huge corridors, but I built these kind of entrances that had the foam around that would to some degree stop the sound bouncing in there. But yeah, I it's all about me, but I actually changed the spaces each time I showed this work, the active crossover touring exhibition. So I built 2 chambers inside each space. I think I still have the drawings on the website, so I would actually make these technical drawings to show how I was going to divide the space each time. And some were really successful, some weren't because of the nature of the space. But some surprisingly well, even open spaces, I built it in a way that it really did help the sound bleed. You were going to hear the other work, of course, but the idea was that my work was in one space, the guest artists were in the other, and then outside you would hear a combination. So yeah, like I say, I needed more than 2 days to build the thing each time, which I was usually only allowed 2 or 3 days, usually working on my own, sometimes really glad of the help when constructing. But I would need at least 1 or 2 weeks to actually make it so that it would be very much more successful in my aim. So maybe I'm better at improvising with space than I am with music and sound.
Yeah, it seems like a totally different field, I guess, but it also have some similarities.
Yeah, like I said, I just think there's I know a lot of people use sound as just another material to express themselves when they're not like a dedicated sound artist, let's say. But then I don't know if they're actually considering what sound does and physically as well as emotionally. So then putting a 2 or 3 pieces that use sound in one space, so there's this kind of mess of 3 things playing at you at the same time. And I've seen it with video as well, a room full of video pieces, and it's just like, it's like walking into a casino or something. Or a pachinko parlor.
Yeah, it reminds me about
overwhelming.
One more question that I had for you, and maybe it will be the last, because I noticed that you have been almost to every continent. Like you have been to lots of countries, and it just interests me. How do you perceive these different soundscapes? How do you perceive do you perceive? I guess you do, but how do you perceive the change of acoustic environment, if it's different, if it really differs when you are in different countries, in different continents, like in Australia or in Europe, for example. I guess you have more examples, but what is...
Yeah, I mean, it's of course everything is so different from the like the sounds of the street in each place are going to be different because of the different cultures to begin with. But then even like the climate would change it. If you're in a cold, dry climate, I think it changes the way you hear the sound compared to a humid, overgrown jungle kind of environment, you know. And then the nature of it, then like I say, if you're in this cold place, then things are more quiet and more spaced out and less happening. Whereas in a more tropical place, things happen more in the street and more outside. So there's always more sound happening. I won't say more sound happening, louder sounds generally. There's always sound happening, of course. There's not more sound. But I don't know, it is interesting. It is part of the interest to travel, to hear these different places. And then of course you go to some places, well, this could be somewhere completely familiar, but you're in somewhere that looks really strange. But it's all part of the experience, definitely. I mean, with some places, like some Asian countries that I go to, there's small factories all the way down one street that you don't often get in many European countries. Well, not Western Europe, for sure, Northern Europe. There would be much bigger things that you can't get anywhere near because there's a security guard there, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah, or going past food places, and if you're in a warm place, that everything's open. There's no windows, of course, so you've got the cooking sounds and people eating and socializing. And then in the colder places, everything's closed, usually with double glazing, and all you hear is traffic and sirens.
And is there any? Did you notice some change of attitude to this essential sound environment in different places of the world? As you mentioned, like because of cultural differences and etc. Is it like does it differ somewhere, or is it more or less the same? I mean, like if it's perceived as an essential part of environment, or is it something that is doesn't have to be there?
I don't think I've been anywhere where they're culturally they're more sensitive to sounds around them than in other places. But like I think especially giving the workshops, people are always surprised when you point out the sound that's happening that they didn't notice before. Or they find a way of listening to something, or even a recording, because it seems to be culturally around the world that people don't have time to just stop and listen. They're always busy with something, even if it's just sitting around talking.
Yeah, maybe some kind of sound or oral literacy is the way to change it a bit and shift the focus somewhere else, and maybe also slow down a bit and perceive in a different way.
Yeah. We don't often. I'm just trying to think. I'm really trying to think if there's huge differences with perception. I guess in more rural, tropical places, they seem to be more aware of the sound around them, but I don't know if they actually. It still takes that little shift to appreciate it. You know what I mean? Because they have to have music playing. Or I mean, okay. So the first time I went to the Amazon rainforest, No, actually, the second time. Okay, the first time I was surprised that you could hear petrol generators, like to give the power, because they're remote places, so they need electricity for light, and so you go to a certain distance, then I can hear another generator there, so someone lives there. Oh, there's another one there. So it took a lot, even in a remote place like that, to get away from these sounds of life. But the second time we were not in such a remote place, and there was like music, really loud music playing from almost every settlement or habitation, and usually like really loud, awful music. but but it seemed like everyone had to have music playing because they didn't really want to listen to the forest or the insects and the animals of the jungle. Going further out from there, it did seem that people were more sensitive, but then they knew that we were out there to record sound, so maybe they'd already started to think more about it. So I don't know if in their everyday life they were more aware of it or not.
Yeah, so thank you for the interview. It was a pleasure for me.
Thank you.
And maybe if there will be some comments or some reactions.
Absolutely, yeah. We talked about it before also, but I'm very happy to answer any questions. Or, I mean, there's going to be people that don't agree with what I said. So, but I'm always happy to have that dialogue, that conversation. I may have even said something that tomorrow I'll think, oh, that was really silly to say. I didn't mean that at all. So yeah, I'm just happy to have that exchange and that conversation.
Yes, in these times, at least in a format like this, unfortunately we cannot have it present in a gallery at our place.
Not yet.
Meeting physically, yeah, not yet, but
yeah.
At least like this, I'm happy that it's happening.
Yeah, well, let's hope that things do get better very soon.